Hi and welcome everyone to this next webinar. This one will be regarding Embarcadero, and we have Stephen Ball with us. My name is Finn Sugden. I'll be your organizer in the background today. And with us, I also think we have the product manager from Alfasoft, David Farnable.
Hi Finn, and good morning everyone, and welcome to this presentation made by Stephen Ball. And good morning, Stephen. Great to have you on board. You can reach me at david@alfasoft.com. david@alfasoft.com.
Okay, good morning, everybody, and nice to be back on these Alfasoft days again. So this session we're going to be looking a little bit, we're talking really mainly around Windows 11 and some of the trends around app development, and as developers what we need to be thinking about and aware about in terms of what's happening within the market. And the key thing here, we're on the latest version now is Rad Studio 11 Alexandria. We have kind of a city name to go along with the version, just to help through. The reason behind the Alexandria name was in kind of ancient times, the greatest library was from Alexandria, and in terms of the connectivity into Windows 11, there's no development tool today that can match what we have from the library point of view for Rad Studio connecting into Windows. Very broad and very deep coverage, which is fantastic, especially with some of the trends that we're going to be looking at and understanding as we go through. So yeah, as I say, my name's Stephen Ball, pre-sales director here at Embarcadero. If you do want to reach out to me, feel free. Any questions come through stephen.ball@embarcadero.com, or you can connect up with me on Delphia Ball on Twitter for some of the stuff that kind of push out around the trends and so on. So the key premise really, when we're looking at getting this session put together a few months back, was to try and cover kind of what's going on the Windows side of things. And Windows desktop is very much a cornerstone of any modern business application. It has been for decades now, since Windows originally kind of came to the fore. But what I want to have a look at is how the market setup is changing. Look at the latest trends that are happening. Some of these pipe back to the stuff that's been happening around Windows 10. There's been a big foundation shift in terms of the way Windows works in Windows 10. Moving on now, Windows 11 is actually moving on to the next kind of level with that. Some of you may remember the big fanfare from Microsoft when Windows 10 was announced about it being the last version of Windows ever. And now we're on Windows 11. So, but there's some, you'll see as we go through, there's some really quite substantial changes to the way Windows is being set up and configured moving forward. And it's making some very, very interesting developer options come through. The WSL, the Windows subsystem on Linux, for Linux running on Windows, opens kind of very deep integration to being able to work with Linux directly from the Windows machine. And there's also some interesting updates around mobile, which I'll tease you with at the end as we get through. So in terms of the desktop landscape, this is purely desktop computers, so ignoring kind of the cloud servers and kind of the servers you'd have running in an office. The desktop landscape that is used today is heavily dominated still by Windows. You can see here, over 75% of the desktop machines are Windows. Another 15% of those are, or just under 16%, are Mac OS. So between the two of them, they're over 91% of the market share, with the rest kind of picked up by some lower numbers. Now, I know when I was talking to David, he was like, "Oh, there's a lot of Chrome OS now in the Nordics, around the schools." And you can actually see very recently, just at the bottom there, Chrome OS has overtaken Linux in terms of a desktop choice. So that's an interesting thing to kind of keep an eye on, but it's still very, very small numbers. Less than 5% of the market is Chrome OS and Linux combined. So it is still quite a small number. Windows is the kind of the main platform to be worried about. Now, in terms of Windows itself, looking at the trends over the last few years, Now, unfortunately, the trends tend to be about a month behind in terms of what they record and publish out. So as of yesterday, when I was checking through the November, well, also in November, so there's no updated stuff that's got Windows 11 onto it yet. But we can see, there's been a large shift. Microsoft has done a very good job of getting people shifted over to Windows 10. And you can see that's been a continuing trend over the last few years, people moving and shifting from Windows 7 and up to Windows 10. So what that really means for us as developers is that we really need to be 100% focused on making sure that our applications are Windows 10 ready right now. So there have been a number of updates and changes from earlier versions of Windows, specifically to deal with trends around hardware that have changed. If you look at high definition monitors, there's now a lot more 2K and 4K monitors being pushed around, retina screens, and so on. And one of the major shifts in Windows 10 has been around having multiple different resolutions running on different monitors at the same time. So this has been kind of an acceptance that no longer having everything stuck at 90/60 dpi and just scaling it accordingly is a done thing. So this adds some complexity in terms of developer design, and it's also had a number of challenges which we'll see as we go through of how to make sure that your apps look good and are usable when you're porting them up from older versions of Windows. And luckily, because of the component architecture within Rad Studio, we've got a very elegant solution to make that happen. So we know Windows is desktop king. Windows 10 is really where it's at. But if we look at the wider market on the whole, Android is maintaining its dominance in the mobile share space. It's up around about 40% of the market in terms of connected devices are using Android. And if you think about it, that's kind of quite logical. There's more phones than there are desktop computers. Not everybody works at a computer during the day, but most people have got a phone with them nowadays. So in terms of business operations, when you're looking at a holistic view of how to automate and make business applications fast and productive, and also taking existing applications and building out so you can add on remote user functionality with the devices people have got, for cameras, accelerometers, the geolocation stuff. All these things are really, really useful for everything from parcel delivery, which obviously there's been a big upturn in that kind of stuff in COVID, to people going to venues or going to museums to have a walk around and wanting to interact with displays, to whatever, people moving between places. You think email is obviously the most simple application. You've got your desktop client for that, but also when you're out on the road, you want part of that functionality with you in an easy to use and easy to consume way. So those kind of interactions are kind of key. And if you look at the difference in the dominance there, very much Android is the big part. Interestingly, iOS is also maintaining its market share, and OS X, Mac OS has again relatively steady, about a fifth of what the Windows desktop side is. So quite clear there that on both mobile platforms they're ahead of the corresponding desktop platforms in terms of connectivity. So it's a very important area to be aware of. But also in terms of deployment of applications, it's something that is going to come back to the last thing we'll look at later on through today, how mobile is actually coming into the desktop as well, and how we need to kind of look at that. So let's just kind of further through the landscape a little bit here. Microsoft have now released Windows 11, that came out the same October 21. So it'd be interesting to kind of get a feel either through the chat or the questions, if you've upgraded to Windows 11 yet, if you're beginning to use it or not. And when we did the latest release of Rad Studio, that was one of the main reasons that we've kind of shifted up from Delphi 10.x versioning to move to 11 because it matches in because of the platform APIs and coverage that we've got. Now, one of the very interesting things in here is obviously about what Microsoft calls the Windows App SDK. Now, this is very much the evolution of the Windows desktop app development APIs. And it brings all the libraries and frameworks and components that developers have been consistently using for app development together. And it tries to make these available in a way that can range across Windows 11, but also down to Windows 10 version 1809. So if you've got kind of complex Windows app development going on, then you can actually use some of these APIs together and get them pushed down. And very much it's about unifying kind of the WinUI, the WinRT, and the MSIX, which is the updated version of the Apex packaging that was originally used as the Windows Desktop Bridge, which is the way to kind of get traditional desktop apps out into the App Store. So some kind of looking at this and thinking, okay, well, this looks like it's the end to the UWP platform, the Universal Windows Platform model. But some interesting reading on that if you want to kind of go and have a look. I'll put a link on one of the blogs there to go and have a look. Now, outside obviously Windows 11 coming to market, there's been quite an interesting upturn with macOS recently. We're beginning to see more ARM platforms pushed forward, and now if you want to buy a MacBook Pro, unless you're getting a refurbed one with an Intel chip in it, they're all ARM based now. And Apple have been producing their own silicon, which has got integrated GPU and CPU on the same chipset with multiple cores hooked on. Machines that are very, very interesting. We have had running internally here, and Jim McKeith has done some really good blog posts showing Windows ARM version. So Windows have got an ARM version, which is part of their tech preview at the moment. But the great thing that they've done is got some really strong emulation in there to run Intel applications on the ARM hardware. So even with the Windows version, Windows ARM version of the OS, we're able to install Rad Studio and actually build and run and debug and do everything we need to do directly through that, which is very, very interesting. That's certainly an area to look at. Now, one of the reasons that Apple have been going towards this is around being more green. The power that they can get out of the chips and the energy that it uses is dramatically less with the ARM architecture. And it's also now bringing in line the architecture they've got on their iPhones and the iPad, which has now led to the latest upgrade in terms of their Mac's app stores, with kind of universal apps being built that can now run across all the hardware. And that's something that's been very core and centered to what we've been doing with Rad Studio, and the latest version, Rad Studio 11 Alexandra, enables you to compile out directly from the IDE for the Intel version of macOS, but also for the ARM version. And you can also do a universal binary that you can ship into the App Store with both versions in there. And then the App Store will then deliver to the device the one that is appropriate for that platform. So all that stuff is taken care of you very easily through just choosing the target platform and building and getting the native application created through Rad Studio. Also, I mentioned a little bit about 4K monitors. That's obviously something that is growingly important to developers as well. And I'll touch back on that a little bit in a moment. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back a little bit, just because a lot of the foundation for the key changes we need to look at are things that have been growing from Windows 10. So I want to really recap through those as we kind of move into the Windows 11 part. So a couple of these I've touched on already, but just to re-emphasize them again, high definition and multi-monitor support is kind of the norm now. We expect to have to deal with our application running at the same time on multiple monitors with different resolutions. So you need to be able to react as the monitor, as your application is dragged from one monitor to another. one of the big challenges there is around displaying images and icons. One of the really powerful things that we've brought in is a new set of components called a virtual image list. And basically what the virtual image list does, it works with a collection of images as well, to be able to provide to the monitor automatically the icons that match the DPI of that monitor. So traditionally, if you had like a 16 by 16 icon, if you try to run that on a very high def monitor now, you'll get a really small image that is just completely unviewable. So now the approach is to take your images, produce them at multiple different resolution sizes that you need, and you put those into this kind of image collection, which is then connected to the virtual image list. And at runtime, the Win32 APIs are then just provided with the image that matches the screen resolution that form is running on automatically. So it's a very, very, very quick and easy way to get a high DPI support into your applications, just by replacing a couple of components very, very quickly. Obviously, the other parts, looking at the system APIs, I've touched a little bit about having the different sets of APIs there with the UWP, the WinRT, and the traditional Win32 APIs, COM and Shell, and so on. Obviously, all of that is well covered through Rad Studio and fully available. And there's some really deep coverage of that in the source directory now as well. So one of the big shifts, if depending on how far you're moving up from Rad Studio, the namespaces that are in place, you can just do Windows dot and then put in the API library that you want, and you can get full access straight into that all the way down, and you can delve into the source with the product as well, to see all the files that are covered through and get down into those. There's also been some, one of the big things that happened around Windows 10 was a number of new controls coming through. So part of that has been a shift towards what they call the Edge browser. Now this is based on Chromium. It's a native component, and this is one of the first native components that's been brought back through. There's some more on the way through with the kind of the WinUI 3 updates that are being worked through. But we have great integration for this already with Rad Studio. We supported it when it was in its canary stage, so that was pre-release. And the latest updates for that support full release version, even as far back as 10.4 too. So, and I'll show you a little screenshot in terms of what a difference that makes compared to the traditional Windows browser. Now, one of the nice things about it is that there is a compatibility mode with it in terms of the component, because we can say which one to use through there. One of the other kind of key factors that's happening around is around app distribution. Now, the MSIX packaging, which is the updated version of what was the AppX packaging for the app stores, basically is a way from the IDE you can build your application with any dependencies built in, and you provide an installer in essence for that app to run. And this is following the kind of trend of notarization. So what notarization is basically a method for signing your application as you build it, as you're a developer ready for release. Now, this is traditionally used through the app stores, but is also used for distributed applications. For example, on Mac OS now, if you want to install an application by allowing the user to download it, kind of the copy-paste type of approach, then you need to make sure that your app is notarized. Otherwise, it throws a whole load of security warnings that a user has to then go through a whole load of screens and nowhere to go to find to say, no, this app is okay, this app is okay. Go and open it. And Windows is doing the same thing. So if you're looking at distributing, especially around the enterprise, then the MSIX packaging is a critical part of what you need to be looking at. And we're seeing more emphasis in an updated version around Windows 11 with that as well. So a very, very key thing. Now, luckily, it's all integrated into the IDE, so you got the chance to package that up. And one of the things that's really nice, actually, if you wanted to test between different machines, is using a PA server to actually build and package and to run this across to another Windows MOX. And then you can test and debug directly from the IDE your remote packaging running across, which is pretty cool. The final part really is obviously 64-bit. All the latest Mac OS is only 64-bit. We're seeing Windows is still supporting 32-bit, which is good. But certainly if you've still got heavily reliant 32-bit applications, then it's definitely worth looking at any third-party dependencies that you've got to try and get those up to 64-bit. It's still there as a platform at the moment, but it's definitely worth looking into because certainly the trends are pushing more and more towards 64-bit. And if Windows does move towards ARM in the future and supporting ARM fully, I think there's going to be more push towards that direction as well. So I mentioned high DPI. This is just a real simple example. This is Windows running. You can see here this is an old installer that needed some update. You can see how small it's running with that old DPI. The button here, you can barely even see that. That's a key consideration. Now, one of the big things in Grad Studio 11 or Delphi 11, C++ Builder 11 is high DPI supporting the IDE for development time. So you can actually design and work through how it's going to look at with standard resolution or with high DPI enabled. So that's kind of a key thing to try and avoid this kind of look and feel as you move through. I mentioned also the depth of API coverage. Here we've got an example of what we call the toast notifications. They're called toast because a bit like putting toast in a toaster, when it's ready, it pops up. Hence why I got the name toast notifications. Yeah, there's an API for calling those, and again, that's all fully wrapped, part of the WinRT API sets that originally came out. That's all wrapped up with Rad Studio and very easy for you to go and connect to that and use those. There's an API to schedule them, to interact with them, and to remove them based on the ID that you provide them as you set them up. Now, I also mentioned about kind of UI updates. One of the things that's very nice, it's quite nice about Windows 10 and some of the work that is clearly happening around the modernization has been a new set of controls that Windows have been putting in place. Now, a number of the older controls were quite dated in the way they worked, specifically things like the calendar control and the activity indicators, kind of the little SQL timer that used to sit there just spinning around the cursors. There's really nice interactive ones now. And what we've done with Rad Studio is to actually implement the same controls natively, but with a slight twist to them, that they're all kind of VCL generated, which means that we can actually then port them back through. So if you've still got customers who are lagging and straggling behind moving off Windows 7, or if you've got customers who are on early versions of Windows 10, then before some of these components were released through, then you can still run them with Rad Studio. As you build, you still have a single source code base. You're not having to do additional checks on the OS version before startup to then say, actually, sorry, we're using components that you can only use on a newer version of the OS here. So, sorry, you're going to need to change your OS before you can run our application. You don't need to worry about that kind of level of detail with this here. So we've got the full usability, the features of the kind of the zooming in and out of the years and the months and having it kind of both touch ready and enabled, but also just kind of giving that more modern look and feel that the customers are looking for now. And it's been, over the last few releases, there's been a number of these components added in over time, from the calendar controls, the pickers, to there's kind of the title bar that's a new thing within Windows 11 as well. That's been around for since 10.4 with us, with the ability to kind of put controls up on the actual title bar. And this is quite often used now as a way to add search or kind of common links to things within the application. In fact, it's something that we use ourselves within Rad Studio to make sure, you know, it's always best to use what you cook, as they say. So, you know, the integration for switching between light and dark mode in the IDE, and you know, the tool insight, these are all integrated onto the top of the IDE now, making them quick and easy to access, freeing up some of the other screen real estate, but also showing you that those components really do work very, very well, regardless of the platform area. The other parts, obviously, things like the Windows Store, there's a component directly in there for integrating and working with that, which is pretty awesome. So talking about the Windows Store, when it comes to deployment, we've got the component in there for enabling you to do in-app purchasing, to enable trials and sales and so on. So rather than having to manage you know, licensing and trialing your software and allowing customers to do different bits, the Windows Store, which is actually it is a very good store for publishing your apps into. The commission rates there are kind of lower than the other stores on the market. Well, they certainly were last time I checked through. Yeah, they enable you very quickly and easily to get your app out there, distributed, get new revenue coming through from it, and to go. Now, the one thing that the store uses is the MSIX packaging to bundle it. And what's kind of pretty cool with the store is it's kind of a bit more of the kind of Linux or the Mac OS kind of model, where when your application is bundled, it has its own kind of virtual registry, and it's kind of sandboxed as well. So it makes it a lot more secure in the way that it runs. But it also means that when it comes to uninstalling and removing applications, there's less to worry about. There's less kind of cleanup to do, because the virtual registry that sits with your application is what you're cleaning up. So you know, that's one of the real advantages of using the MSIX packaging rather than the old copy and paste. And as I said, the old copy and paste approach is getting harder to do because of the way they're beginning to lock down the binaries if they're not notified. So that's kind of a key thing to look at. Now, I mentioned kind of high DPI being important to developers as well, and we've certainly been working towards this with all the bits that we've been doing. And Rad Studio 11, the IDE is in full high DPI mode. You can see there, this is kind of on 9x zoom, difference between 10.42 and version 11. And this is all down to kind of the updated support of, you know, of updating the fonts and getting the icons and everything updated. And so we've been building the components and bits that even we're using to update and modernize the IDE, which is why we know it works really well. And we're seeing a lot of really positive feedback from that. There's a number of new Tools API interfaces as well. So if you are doing any third-party any external IDE plugins or building your own plugins, then that's worth having a look at to make sure that you can take full support of the high DPI support. And quite honestly, I really like the updates to the icons as well in the IDE. I've not really noticed a change, which is actually a really good thing, because everything is just very intuitive in terms of the updates that have been made. It's very good. Now, one of the components I mentioned about earlier was the WebView 2, which is the update to the browser component that specifically is used by VCR developers, but is, you know, there's a FireMonkey version of it as well. Now, the Edge browser update, you can see here between the two versions of how the content is being laid out based on the modern standards of web coding. And Internet Explorer always kind of struggled with some of the layout configurations and setup. As you can see here, we've got a page directly from the Rad Studio website, from the Embarcadero site. You can see here how it looks with Edge and how it looks with Internet Explorer. You know, that said, if you are working with stuff that requires Internet Explorer, then obviously there's a an configuration option within the T-Web browser to update it and use the old version. But this is a real nice update, very, very easy win just to recompile in Rad Studio 11, because where you've been using T-Web browser, you're now able to kind of get the better rendering directly through because of the update in the engine options. Okay, so let's get into Windows 11 a little bit. And one of the key things I wanted to just mention around Windows 11 was the introduction of the Windows subsystem for Linux. And what this allows developers to do is run the GNU Linux environment, and you can access it directly through the command line. You get access to the utilities in there, and you can run Linux very, very happily just in the background on Windows. There's a number of distributions that are being made available through WSL, from Ubuntu to Kali, to Fedora, Debian, OpenSUSE. There's a number of platforms out there to do this, which is great. It's good to have some good choice. I think Jim McKeith did about an hour deep dive into the whole Windows subsystem for Linux. Obviously, we don't have time to do that today, but if you have a look at the bottom of the screen, there's a link there that you can grab to be able to get out there and watch the replay of that. I think he also mentioned one called Penguin, which is specifically designed up to run under the WSL platform. And this has been great. This started coming out in Windows 10. Windows 11 now allows users to run full GUI Linux apps via WSL2, which is the latest incarnation of it, which is great. This means we can start building and deploying Linux applications directly from the IDE on the same machine that we're developing on. So I'll say that, we can build our code and run it on Windows natively, and we can also run it directly on the machine that we're building on through Linux as well. We can have them side by side. In fact, I can show you what that looks like. It looks like this. So here I've got a single application running for Windows, and the same application recompiled and running on Linux, which is pretty cool. Now, the WSL is kind of faster and more lightweight on computer resources than running virtual machines. So this is it makes it a lot easier to actually run and kind of have multiple bits running, which is pretty cool. And you can also execute kind of the Linux binaries, I said, directly from the IDE. Now, to do the GUI element of it, you need to use FMX, FireMonkey. Or the other option potentially is there are third-party. There's a third-party plugin for cross VCL, which allows you to recompile VCL application GUIs onto Linux. That's an external tool, though. So if you have got a big integration on that and you desperately want to run something out into Linux from it, then you can do that. But highly would recommend making sure the business logic is decoupled from your UI, and then just build the UI that you need for Linux and provide the functionality of the part that you need on Linux out of course. And this is great specifically for building and testing things like kiosk applications, where you want to use the strengths of Linux, which is kind of standalone mode, just left there to run with no with a general kind of user interface that you're not giving people access to the whole platform on. So the other thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about was around mobile and some of the changes that we're beginning to see happening. Now, these are not necessarily trends that have hit fully yet, but they are beginning to be beated and they're beginning to be looked at. And one of those is the Windows subsystem for Android, which is quite an interesting move. Now, obviously, Android and Linux are both, well, Linux is Linux, but Android is Linux-based. So it's quite an interesting move that Microsoft are now partnering up with Amazon to bring the Amazon App Store to Windows 11. Now, this is actually quite an interesting play. It's certainly making the Amazon App Store reach a whole new target of devices. But from a developer point of view, it means those that are building Android applications have also got the chance to target out to Windows through the Amazon store. So yeah, this is quite an interesting push. And obviously, the Amazon store is more targeted towards things like their Kindle Fire and the Fire HD tablets. I know my kids have got a few of those, which they're constantly on. But being able to kind of recompile applications out into the Amazon App Store and run them both on a Windows machine or out to a tablet actually means that getting into that store is actually a bit more of an interest to me now as a developer. So if you have got apps, if you're already targeting the Google, the Play Store, then I would definitely be considering trying to get a copy of your app into the App Store as well for Amazon. Now, at the moment, this is only on the Windows Insider program. It's in beta. It's in the US only at the moment as well. But it's an interesting thing just to keep an eye on and see how that kind of develops with the market. The way it works is that as you install your application from the Amazon App Store, it enables the subsystem for Android at the same time. And if you uninstall the subsystem for Android, any of the Android apps get removed from the machine at that point as well. So this is, this is a very, very interesting thing that I'm certainly going to be keeping an eye on as we go through. Virtual Machine Library. I just want to show you some of the settings that would be required. So on the virtual machine, under the processors, you need to enable all hypervisor applications in the virtual machine. Now, I'm running on a relatively old MacBook, and I find that kind of slows the VM down a little bit in terms of my experience, but it does enable me to run the Linux subsystem sitting on the new machines. It shouldn't be much of a major issue. So let's jump in here. I'm just going to reopen the IDE. Guys, are there any questions that you want me to take quickly? And then just once my VM is rebooted, then I can do the quick demo that I was going to do around the
So Stephen, I can ask you a question from Gunnar. I'm a long-time Delphi user, Turbo Pascal. We have plenty of those. Starting a new project, would you recommend me to use FMX? That's FireMonkey, right? Or VCL framework?
It depends what you're doing. I tend to develop by default today using FireMonkey. Just because I quite like the framework, and it also means that a lot of the time I'm building stuff that I'm thinking, how am I getting this onto mobile? Or I found I've been doing quite a lot of mobile development. If I'm doing stuff that is specifically for Windows and it's only for Windows, then the VCL is still the best framework. The integration for the accessibility and other kind of bits within it are just are better. But that said, FireMonkey is kind of catching up with those kind of bits. FireMonkey is a very mature framework now. So what I would say is I'd just be smart around the development process that you put in place. So use your data modules, use your classes, use your units of code, build things in a modular way that then all you're doing is looking at building the UI to link to your model, rather than building all the business logic into the UI. Because if you do that, then you can easily use both and have multiple versions of things running through the project, and that extends beyond if you choose a desktop or if you choose mobile. But it also means that if you're looking at things like multi-tier development, which are very important for mobile development as well, that you can expose some of that business logic out through the middle tier very quickly and easily as well, because your core business logic is then just having to be called from an API that's coming in rather than from a user interface that's coming in. There's no right or wrong, but I think it just kind of helps focus us to be quite aware of how we put our application together in the first place.
Thanks.
Okay, is there any other questions at the moment, or should I think I'm...
There are. Are you done with your presentation? Two more questions I can see here. There's one question from Greta. I believe you already discussed this, and I think I know what the answer will be, but I'll read it anyway. What would you say is the #1 new feature in Alexandria?
Oh,
Tricky, right?
Yeah, well, I think the high DPI support and the evolution of that is fantastic. And just for me, immediately when I boosted up the IDE and I started working with it, it was just so much clearer, sharper, and softer on the eyes. If you're working day to day in the IDE is the best feature in terms of the upgrade. Obviously the additional deployment part, if you're looking to get out onto Mac, having the ARM compiler for Mac as well, so you can natively compile and distribute on the latest Mac hardware, is very important. It gives you first-class citizen status there as well. Yeah, there's been a number of, apart from the new compiler, which obviously is quite a big thing, the whole IDE update is just fantastic. Is that the same thing you were going to say?
Yeah, the high DPI it's great, and I know a lot of users they are in love with it. So that's a great new feature. By the way, you can download the Rad Studio 11 datasheet in the chat window or to the right if you want to learn more about the V11 new features.
Okay.
Would you like me to read the last question also, Stephen?
Yeah, go for it then. Yeah, why not?
Okay, it's a bit different from the other two. It's from Lian. We've been looking at Rad Server and the new Rad Server Lite.
Mm-hmm.
Is this sold separately or is it included with the Rad Studio? Maybe you should start by saying a few words about Rad Server and Rad Server Lite, which is completely new, right?
Rad Server Lite is a new update or new way to deploy Rad Server in essence. Yeah. So Rad Server is a complete MEAP, so mobile enterprise application platform, and what it allows you to do is to have a really scalable backend that is true REST, but there's also a number of really cool IoT edge integration features within it. Allows you to integrate edge points into the REST APIs very, very quickly. It's got embedded user security. It's got push notifications built into it. So if you're pushing stuff out onto mobile to send the alerts that out from the central server and so on. So it is a full MEAP. The full Rad server obviously provides all of that capability and is available to you to deploy out. There's some Docker versions of it for easy deployment. The basis essence of it is that with the Enterprise Edition, you get a license for installing an instance of Rad server that you can then use, and this is ideal for kind of providing external people within your organization, or if you're kind of building something you sell on as a hosted platform, then your version of that hosted platform you can cover under that. Now, if you're deploying something out to multiple different sites, then if it's within your own organization, so for example, say your company's called Acmeco and you've got 5 offices around the world and you deploy out to each one of those offices, then you need a multi-site license. And that comes with the Architect Edition, and that's just bundled in. If you want to OEM it and you want to kind of install it out on your customers' sites, and your customers are owning their server infrastructure and the setup, and they're managing all that themselves, then you can talk with Alfasoft directly about an OEM agreement, which then allows you to embed it and deploy it out under OEM. Now, for the kind of the feedback we have through from the field is that for a lot of OEM agreements, actually what they needed was just a relatively light version that they were able to run kind of a handful of machines against, 5 to 10 machines. So for that kind of scale, you don't need the same scale that you'd need for the full web server based version, and that's why Rad Server Lite was introduced to market. So one of the kind of core parts behind Rad Server is the way that it's managed. It's got a smart engine built into it. The engine in the back end is powered by Interbase, and with the Rad Server Lite, you'll have within your license keys a license number that you go to, or serial number that you go to the Embarcadero reg pages, pop it in, that'll download and give you a license file. Now that license file then enable RAD Server Lite to run. It basically uses the interface to go version instead of the full server version. So it is more limited in terms of what it does, but it is there then available to you to have it as a kind of install and deploy and leave running version. So obviously it doesn't run under kind of IIS or Apache. You can still kind of do some proxies to redirect to it, which is what we'd recommend, certainly to kind of get a HTTP layer onto it. Yeah, it's just a lighter version meant for kind of smaller deployments. Now, the great thing about it, though, is it's full binary compatible with the packages that are built for the full RAD server. So if you decide that at any point that you want to scale up from RAD Server Lite to the full version, then all you need to do is just take the existing setup and configuration, and instead of installing the Lite kind of program, you can literally just replace that with the full version, and then run that directly out from IIS. So there's no recoding or anything else to do like that. All the packages, all the BPLs that are generated to run with RAD server are then just ready to go.
Excellent. And Leanne, if you want to learn more about RAD server, contact Alfasoft after this session.
Yeah.
And same goes with the different editions of RAD server. Yeah, those were the questions, Stephen. Would you like to continue the presentation? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just finish up quickly. So Windows subsystem for Linux here, I've installed the Ubuntu. So I just wanted to show you here very quickly kind of how this sets up and runs. What I just wanted to hopefully show you is just how to open up Ubuntu. The thing that I was going to show you from the IDE here is that under the target platforms with Linux, you can set your properties here to just point to a local distribution. Now here, this one's set up at the moment as port on this IP address to this port, which was what it was last time it ran through. So the only thing I have noticed is it sometimes changes. You might need to just update your port, your host number. But installing Ubuntu through to see what updates are required, which it tends to do the first time it boots up. So for example, here I can use this MNT mount, and I can then just give the file path on my local machine, and this corresponds with my kind of C data folder. I've got that opened up and see that these files exist in there, which is pretty cool. It's to be able to access your local file system directly from the Windows from the Linux subsystem. So you see here, here's kind of all my files there: the basketball, the pharmacy, the medicines ID, and you can see the same things listed in here. Change directory to my PA server, launch PA server. It's as simple as that. Just check the IP address. The IP address has changed. So I'm not going to go through and update that, but you've seen the screenshot already how easy it is to run. That's all you need to do. Set PA server running. Make sure your connection is set up here, and then you can literally run and interact with it on your local machine. Just pop straight up and just do a build first and then run, and I think it will go. So sorry for the VM failure partway through, which meant I'm having to try and get those bits rebooted back up. But yeah, just to kind of summarize through, the key thing today was looking at Windows. Very much, as we saw at the top, Windows is very much the key to desktop development still. And there's a lot of interesting trends around mobile happening, and obviously with RAD Studio being able to compile out all different platforms natively, which is the only tool that does that in the same way. It gives you the chance to get out across all those platforms very, very quickly. The Win API layer is very, very strong. And again, I know the VM, I'd have shown you where to kind of go find those bits within the UI, but I can make sure they're kind of covered up with any follow-up with all these things. Interesting trends happening around mobile, and obviously, with Android being very much key and iOS being bigger than both of the Apple desktop platform. And if you think of Android and Windows, Android is definitely bigger now than Windows because the way it's being used. We need to be thinking about kind of the multi-device setup and configuration, and also think about things like RAD server and data snap as liberties to be able to provide out existing data to clients, so you can get that power those devices on the edge back into your core applications. And also, we kind of saw, obviously the Linux bit there running on Windows, and we had the screenshot that I pulled up earlier here. This is the output, basically the demo that I was going to show you. It's great to be able to kind of work with that and be thinking about how we can easily target now those other platforms in a much simpler way, because the updates around Windows 11 are so different.
Well, thank you, Stephen. That was a great presentation. So if anyone has any additional questions, you can send them to info@alfasoft.com. So thank you very much, Stephen.
Thank you.